Welcome to the Tuesday, September 21st, 2021 regular meeting of the Walnut Creek City Council. The City Council is conducting this meeting from the City Council chamber, and staff are complying with the current regulations of the California Department of Public Health and Cal OSHA for safe indoor meetings. We're continuing to allow for remote public comments via Zoom, in addition to in-person comments. We ask that all in-person attendees wear masks as per Contra Costa County orders. This meeting is being held in accordance with the Brown Act as currently in effect under the State Emergency Services Act, the Governor's Emergency Declaration related to COVID-19, and the Governor's Executive Order N2920 issued on March 17, 2020 that allows attendance by members of the City Council, city staff, and the public to participate and conduct the meeting by video conference. Video conference locations are not open to the public. For this meeting, the City Council is participating from the Council Chamber at City Hall, and the Council Chamber is open to the public. All in-person attendees must wear masks. As some attendees may be participating in their first Walnut Creek City Council meeting or their first teleconferencing meeting, I wanted to welcome everyone and talk briefly about the public comment process. For each agenda item, there will be an opportunity for public comment on the item. Thus, if you desire to speak to an item on the agenda this evening, please hold your comments until the Council considers that item. Additionally, we have a section on the agenda titled Public Communications, which is for public comments for items not on the agenda. Any comments during public communications should not relate to an item that is on the agenda this evening. Consistent with Section 9.5 of the City Council Handbook, 30 minutes will be initially allocated for public communication for items not on the agenda. Additional time for public communications for items not on the agenda will be provided at the end of the open session portion of the meeting if necessary. This process is consistent with Section 9.5 of the City Council Handbook, adopted July 15, 2014, and will allow for all public comments to be received during the meeting for items not on the agenda. When I open the public comment period, use the raised hand feature or press *9 if you're connected by audio only, which will alert staff that you have a public comment you'd like to provide. We ask that everyone who wishes to speak on an item please use the raised hand feature to state your intent to speak when the item is called. If you're attending in person, please complete a speaker identification card and line up behind the lectern at the appropriate time. Please wait your turn, and once brought into the meeting, state your name and city of residence for the record. Please keep in mind that this is a city business meeting. The City Council has adopted rules of decorum to ensure that meetings are conducted efficiently and effectively, and that all members of the public have a full, fair, and equal opportunity to be heard. All remarks should be addressed to the City Council. Please do not use profanity during your comments. As the Council is conducting these meetings via video teleconference, and given the COVID-19 pandemic and the increased number of speakers that have wanted to make comments on various issues during our meetings, and consistent with city policies related to public comments, each speaker will have 2 minutes to make your remarks. The Zoom feed for each speaker will cut off automatically at 2 minutes. The Council will accept oral comments. Written comments submitted have been and will be posted to the city's website for public review and are included in the meeting record but will not be separately read into the record. To provide a live remote public comment, join the Zoom video conference meeting. The meeting ID is 829-7892-8717. The passcode is 627851. Should you choose to not provide comments but would like to view the meeting, you may do so in one of the following ways. YouTube Live, you can visit the City of Walnut Creek's YouTube channel. Cable broadcast, Comcast Channel 28 in the incorporated Walnut Creek area only, Rossmore Channel 26, Wave Channel 29, and AT&T UVerse Channel 99. Or you can live stream it online on the city's website, which leads us to the Pledge of Allegiance. And at this time, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Would the city clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Darling?
Here.
Councilmember Haskell?
Here.
Councilmember Silva?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Francois?
Here.
And Mayor Wilk?
Here. All right, next item is the consent calendar. Does any council member wish to pull any item for discussion? Nope. All right. Does any member of the public wish to comment on an item on the consent calendar? Please use the raised hand feature or press *9 if you're connected by audio only, if you'd like to provide a public comment. For those who desire to provide public comment on a consent calendar item, please raise your hand now. As a reminder, each speaker will have 2 minutes to make their oral remarks. The Zoom feed for each speaker will cut off automatically at 2 minutes. Written comments submitted have been and will be posted to the city's website for public review and are included in the meeting record, but will not be separately read into the record. At this time, I'll ask the city clerk if there are any members of the public who would like to provide comments.
Mayor, I don't see any hands raised for public comment.
Okay, seeing no speakers, I'll ask the council if anyone would like to make a motion with regard to the consent calendar.
Move to adopt the consent calendar items 2A through 2G.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. City clerk, could you please call the roll?
Councilmember Silva,
Aye.
Councilmember Haskew,
Aye.
Councilmember Darling,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Francois,
Aye.
and Mayor Welk.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
And the next item on the agenda is public communications. This portion of the meeting is reserved for comments on items not on the agenda. Under the Brown Act, the council cannot act on items raised during public communications, but may respond briefly to statements made or questions posed, request clarification, or refer the item to staff. Consistent with Section 9.5 of the City Council Handbook, 30 minutes will be allocated at this time for public communications for items not on the agenda. Additional time for public communications for items not on the agenda will be provided at the end of the meeting if necessary. Does any member of the public wish to provide public comments at this time? Please use the raised hand feature or press *9 if you're connected by audio only, if you'd like to provide a public comment. For those who desire to provide public comment on an item not on the agenda, please raise your hand now so that we can identify the total number of speakers that desire to speak at this time. As a reminder, each speaker will have 2 minutes to make their oral remarks. The Zoom feed for each speaker will cut off automatically at 2 minutes. Written comments submitted have been posted to the city's website for public review and are included in the meeting record, but will not be separately read into the record. And at this time, I'll note that the time is 6:07, and we will take public comments on items not on the agenda until approximately 6:37, and then the remainder of any such comments at the end of the open session portion of the meeting. And I will just quickly remind everybody that our item on the agenda tonight is the priorities for the city council, which covers a lot. So if people have comments that relate to one of the priorities, the time to speak will be under that consideration item number 5. But if there are any comments that do not relate to that, this is the time to come on up and make them. So we have somebody, we'll take the public comments first in person, and then we'll go to online if anybody has raised their hand.
Hello, Council. David Rangel, Walnut Creek resident, retired Walnut Creek PD Sergeant. Several of us recently commented on Nextdoor in regards to the uptick in violent crime in our city. Suggestions, opinions, and even a list of actionable items were shared. A general theme especially among those of us with law enforcement background, was that a diminished proactive enforcement occurred in the last few years. And the hope now is that Chief Knox turns the department around with proactive enforcement at the forefront, and not just in our downtown, but our neighborhoods. As one person commented with law enforcement experience, and I quote, "In short, getting back to all the fundamentals of police work. Thank you, Chief Knox, for seeing the need. It's not a one-weekend fix. Your community is asking for more service throughout the city. Be the chief that brings it back to what it used to be." End of quote. City officials, if you are going to keep on using the word transparency, then you are required to have willingness to be honest and open with your community, or else you are chipping away at your integrity, and your community will continue to lose confidence in your governance and management. We all know City Hall and the PD can do better, as Chief Knox recently proved by listening to his community, and the hope is that he continues to do so. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Susie, do we have any people online?
Yes, we will go ahead and bring in user BG.
Hello, this is Barbara Guinness. I think I want to talk about the city council strategic priorities, so I guess I wait until you get to item number 5.
Yes, if it has to do with the priorities.
Okay, yes, I wanted to talk about those. Okay, thank
Okay.
you very much. I'm sorry, I'm done then. I'll
We'll,
leave it at that.
we'll talk to you in a bit. Thanks.
Okay.
Mayor, there are no additional hands raised.
All right, seeing no additional hands raised, we will close the public communications portion. Let me just first ask if there is any member of the council that would like to comment on any of the public communications that have been brought up? Seeing none, we will now close that, which brings us to our consideration item 5. 5A, City Council 2021. Oh, I am just racing ahead, aren't I? All right. So I know the council would like to make their announcements. So let's have council member and staff announcements, reports on activities or requests. And are there any closed session announcements?
Mr. Mayor, there was no reportable action from closed session this evening.
Yes, good evening, Mayor and Council. Dan Buckshire, City Manager. You may recall a couple months ago I mentioned that we did receive an award from the California Emergency Services Association for exceptional efforts in support of emergency management and preparedness, and I did just want to show off the actual award. In COVID times, we could not accept it in person, so it did show up in the mail about 2 months later. So here it is, and just as a reminder and as a thank you to everyone who has been involved in emergency response really over the last year and a half now. But this was in particular for our joint efforts with the Golden Rain Foundation at Rossmore. Obviously, we had a high-risk population in Rossmore, given the demographics. And so the Golden Rain Foundation worked very hard to secure their facilities, implement rules with social distancing and masking, especially in the early days when a lot was unknown and everybody was trying to figure things out. We supported those efforts at the city by coordinating very closely in terms of what was being opened, what was being closed, what types of regulations were being put in place so that what was occurring inside of Rossmore behind the gates through Golden Rain Foundation was consistent with what we were doing at the city. In addition, and what I think really set things apart for this award was not only were we focused on the physical safety of folks, but their mental and emotional well-being. So we did help establish a volunteer program for deliveries of medications and food early on before many stores had made the adjustments to do the same. And then we established a hotline for folks, primarily for seniors who are feeling the effects of isolation and in some instances just needed somebody to talk to. And we fielded hundreds, if not thousands, of calls during that time frame, and we're able to really lend a helping hand and help direct folks to do so. And I do want to note that our efforts over the past year and a half were done while our emergency services manager position was vacant. And I see we have our Deputy City Manager, Carla Hansen, here, who helped fill the void, as well as many others throughout the city. So it's really nice to receive this award in recognition of all the efforts that occurred over the last year and a half.
Thank you, Dan. All right, brings us to our council member reports and activities, AB 1234, council member assignments, and various activities and upcoming events. No? No? Should, well, I don't know, it shows red, but it actually is on. Let's start this time with Councilmember Darling.
Okay, the first thing I wanted to report was something that actually I should have reported last time. Vice Mayor Francois and I met with the Public Education Committee with the Youth Leadership Commission to talk about their interest in having youth members on commissions, and we gave them some feedback and asked them some questions and gave them some homework, because that's what you do with young people, is you give them homework. The only other thing that, since we've last met, now that I've cured the things that I forgot when we were here last week, we did go up to our cabin this week, and we were lucky. The Dixie Fire was no more than about 15 miles from the cabin. It didn't get any closer than that. Luckily, the wind stayed in our favor. But today, when I was driving out, that fire is still not controlled. It's 960,000 acres, which is roughly twice the size of Contra Costa County. And I left our cabin and drove for 2 hours to Chico before I got out of the fire scar, driving in and out of the fire scar. And just amazing to see what has happened to those communities, and to see this is not a normal fire behavior by any stretch of the imagination. It's something far different than my Forest Service years all those years ago. It's a sign of climate change, and it was pretty amazing to drive through today. So that's my report.
Thank you, Cindy. Councilmember Haskew.
Thank you. I attended Contra Costa Transportation Authority. We talked about funds for Innovate 680, which they're trying. They have, as part of that, they have a project for mobility on demand, and they're investing time and energy to develop a program that if you have a destination and you live in anywhere, it will tell you how to get from point A to point B, what kind of transportation there will be, what points you need to pay for, and in theory, you'll be able to pay for it all when you start out, and all done on a mobile device. Then we also spent some time talking about some of the exciting things that are happening at Gomentum. Gomentum is in fact where we are, it's in the Naval Weapons Station, and it's where they are testing autonomous vehicles and other vehicles, connected vehicles, and things like that. And the more they talk about it and the more progress that is occurring there, the more I think we're in a very lucky place to have that right next door to us. We're going to, I think, ultimately get jobs and technology that will lead the country and perhaps the world. I also attended the CalCog meeting where we got a report on legislation, and one of the more fascinating discussions was what the CalCog was going to do about lobbying for the Brown Act adjustments. And it was basically decided or recommended that the Brown Act was cutting edge when it was passed, but it doesn't reflect today's world with so much of our being able to relate to one another electronically and other ways. And so we're going to have hope that the legislation can find an equitable way to keep the transparency that the Brown Act is supposed to encourage, but also let us do more efficiently. I'm done.
Thank you, Luella. Let's go to Mayor Pro Tem Francois.
Thank you, Mayor. I missed last week's meeting due to a work conflict, but so I have a couple of updates. In August, the mayor and I met as a legislative committee with Deputy City Manager Carla Hansen and the city's lobbyist in Sacramento, and took a position on two bills, probably of most relevance to residents would be SB 9, the bill that would allow lot splits and duplexes as a matter of right. The city took a formal opposed position on that bill. It did end up passing the legislature and being signed by the governor into law, but I wanted the residents to know that that was the position the city took on SB 9. I met with the Golden Rain Foundation as the liaison, the council liaison to Rossmore, and Chief Knox was also in attendance. I was able to introduce him, let the folks in Rossmore know the positive news about the COVID vaccination rates in the city and the efforts the city is taking to make sure that people that come to City Hall and visit the city are safe and responsible. I'll let Council Member Silva give the update on Community Service Day, but I also mentioned that that was coming up on October 9th and provided an update to them about one of our major priorities on Your Parks, Your Future, and developing a plan and a funding source to rebuild some of the critical facilities in Heather Farm. Along with the mayor and our housing manager, who's attended the DEI Task Force, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, last Wednesday. And we have met now 3 times and have come up with a plan, action item plan for the next 90 days, which will involve developing a community survey, coming up with a communications plan, and trying to develop a creative marketing and branding. I'm leaving that to someone far more qualified than I to do. We did agree on a community agreement, essentially rules of engagement and discussion and decorum with one another, came up with a vision and mission statement, and then started the discussion about survey themes and sub-themes. Let's see, what else do I have here? I just wanted to say too, that in the past in the past 4 to 6 weeks, I've had the opportunity to visit the downtown library, and I've been really impressed by the number of patrons that are returning. It's nice to see the kids back there checking out books. It seems to be pretty active. Our tenant at the Library Cafe looks like he's pretty busy. And just to let folks know that the YVR library is closed currently for parking lot repaving, but should be open up later in the fall, maybe towards November timeframe. And that is my report.
Thank you, Matt. Councilmember Silva.
Thank you very much, Mayor. I will mention that City Manager Buckshire and I, as liaisons from the city to the Chamber of Commerce Board, attended their board meeting last week. They were interested in some of our updates, but it was also interesting to hear them discuss. They had an anecdotal report on vacancies in the Shadelands Business Park. And then they also were discussing the winter ice rink and whether they can actually pull it off in partnership with Walnut Creek downtown. And the answer to that remains to be seen in the next 30 days, I would guess. At this month's Recycle Smart Board meeting, we will begin the process of discussing rates for the coming rate year. Again, as in this last year, since there is no market for the sale of recyclables, our rates have to also absorb the cost of collecting and processing the recycled materials, which didn't have to happen that way in the past. But we will be discussing that in the next, at the meeting this week and moving forward. Community Service Day is set for Saturday, October 9th. We have many projects that have no openings, but we have some projects in particular that need a lot of help. You can go to the city's website to sign up. We have 4 schools that are still looking for help on their campuses, and we have about 3 parks projects around the city that could also use some help. So check out the city's website, www.walnut-creek.org, and click on the homepage banner that goes by. It's orange, green, can't miss it. And finally, I will say this is the annual meeting this week of the League of California Cities. I think 4 out of 5 of their council colleagues are attending. And we will be having educational sessions as well as our annual business meeting at the end of the week. And it should be enlightening. This is the first in-person meeting that we have had at the state level in now 2 years, because the last annual conference that was in person was 2 years ago. And look forward to seeing you all.
Thank you. And I just want to state that our own Councilmember Cindy Silva will be installed as the president of the California League of Cities this week. And so congratulations to Cindy, who will be representing not just Walnut Creek, but all of California cities at that point.
My husband still hopes there's time for a change of heart.
So, all right, thank you. All right. For my update, a couple of interesting ones, actually. So first is that we had gotten notification from a family that lives in the Central Valley area that they had uncovered some information through an inheritance that their great-grandfather was the first police chief of Walnut Creek. They presented us with some information, and sure enough, our records show that he was. And so last Wednesday, we had a presentation at the police department for Theodore Burling, and it was actually his family that came, and they had a nice frame. And it showed that in 1926, the city had appointed him to the town marshal position, and he was appointed the chief of police in 1928 and served until 1948. The frame display is now in our police department lobby, and it's pretty interesting. This was our first police chief. We had no information on this. I also had noted that over the weekend that our police, we had our police force out throughout downtown, again, just providing a presence and providing any kind of deterrence for any kind of activity that people don't have the best intentions in mind. But everything is safe and peaceful, and we're so glad to see that. And I want to thank Chief Knox and our police department for providing that extra security downtown. So I know all the residents are very happy, and the visitors, about that too. And the last thing I'd like to state is really more just for the residents in general, as they've seen, and we heard from our city manager last week, There's a county directive that's going into effect tomorrow that is requiring vaccinations or proof of a negative COVID test for indoor businesses. And this includes restaurants and gyms and places that people would be going indoors. I'm asking that people not take this out on the businesses. The businesses are just following the county orders that were made in order to put the pandemic behind us and keep everyone safe, including children and those who are vaccinated and those, of course, who are unvaccinated. People can still provide proof of recent negative COVID tests within 3 days, or sit outside if they're going to dine. This is not up to the businesses, and the county will be fining those businesses who don't comply. So again, I ask residents to please be civil with businesses and understand that they do not have a choice in this matter. Non-compliance will be taken seriously. The bottom line is that all of us just want to be able to go back to having our lives go back to normal and get past the pandemic. So please do your part. I encourage getting vaccinated and keeping proof of it on your phone, but short of that, do not take it out on your fellow neighbors or businesses. Everybody would thank you for that one. So with that, we come to our consideration item. Item 5A. And this is City Council 2021 to 2022 Priorities Plan Update. And this will authorize, or I'm sorry, at this time I invite the staff to provide a presentation.
Good evening, Mayor, council members, members of the public, city staff. Carla Hansen, Deputy City Manager, in front of you for the first time since COVID in a mask. So if you can't hear me while I'm presenting in a mask, please let me know. The item before you is an update on your 2021-2022 council priorities. As you all remember, you set these priorities in March of 2021, and we are before you in June to present work plans for each of these priorities. And this is our first update on what we've accomplished on those work plans in our first quarter, and to give you a preview of what work is going to be completed through the next quarter. So we'll walk through each of these priorities. We will pause and take questions after each update, so you all can ask questions. We do have, I am here to answer questions, but also we have a huge team of staff here behind these priorities, priority sponsors and their staff who are able to answer more questions as well. So with that, we'll jump right in. So the first priority for council was diversity, equity, inclusion. Really the focus of this priority is to continue making Walnut Creek a welcoming and inclusive community. So the mayor and mayor pro tem are leading a community-based DEI task force, which a mayor pro tem did just update us all on. The task force has been busy. We received 80 plus applications for this task force, and 13 community members were selected. They are forming a 90-day action plan, and the task force is also being aided by a consultant to help facilitate and create some create an action plan and mission and vision. You stole my thunder, Mayor Pro Tem here. So this task force will be recommending ways to increase inclusivity and diversity in our community to the council in the upcoming months. On the other side, on the internal side of things, the city staff has formed an internal working group, aptly named Team Rising Tide. This was established in June 2021, and we have 12 staff members that represent all departments and all bargaining units. And this task force will also be doing some intensive training and also providing recommendations to the community-based task force in their work coming up. We're also going to be conducting a lot of training around DEI. So this is training for both task forces, as well as all city staff, the city council, and our commissions. And this training is set to begin in November. With that, we'll pause and answer any questions on this priority.
Any questions from council? Ms. Cindy?
Thank you, and thank you for a great presentation here. I know the training has been in process for a while for the city on diversity, equity, and inclusion, And you're talking about it starting in November. When do you think it'll be completed?
That's a good question. I think we're going to be starting with the task forces and then going to council, commissions, and then all of city staff. I'm actually going to hand it over to looking over here.
Actually, I can
Thank
speak
you,
to
Dan.
that. So we're envisioning a first round. We're still working it out. So the consultant has a baseline training that they would provide, but they also want to customize it based upon a survey and other feedback from our organization. So it's more specific and meaningful to Walnut Creek. I envision we would cycle through all staff within the first year, but we're really viewing this as an ongoing component. So it's not as if we're going to do this for 6 months or a year and then we're done. There will be components of training related to DEI, implicit bias, and other types of similar training on an ongoing basis for the foreseeable future.
So it's more the beginning of a cycle, get through everyone, and then see where we are and what else we need to do in the future.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? No? All right, great. Thanks. Moving on, I guess.
All right. Next priority is economic development and COVID recovery. The focus of this priority is really to update our economic development strategic plan while taking lessons learned from the pandemic that we all went through. So this priority is broken up into really 4 distinct areas: economic development, downtown support and management, blueprint and development services, and then short-term rentals and cannabis regulations. So we'll briefly walk through each and then take questions. So our economic development division has been, continues to work with businesses to help them recover out of the pandemic, while building on elements of revisiting our economic development strategic plan. Our departments, so our economic development division, our community development department, and public works have been working hard on our rebound program, which the council did extend through the end of the calendar year. The Economic Development Division is also working with the Office of Business and Economic Development, site selection community, and industry consultants on development of a retail strategy and office study to further understand opportunities of business growth and expansion in the city. The office property study launched in August and will be set to conclude about in November. And the retail strategy is really focused on vacant properties in the downtown, and then how to achieve a vibrant mix of retail throughout the city as well. So that study is projected to be completed in spring 2022. Another thing the division is working on is an economic development dashboard, which is really key indicators to see how well we're doing economically in the city. So right now, the data is being updated with 2020 census data, as well as our sales tax consultant, HDL, is also providing sales tax data coupled with some GIS mapping capabilities to create some retail zones and districts in the city. So this is longer term work plan here, but set to be completed in early 2022. So moving on to downtown support and management. Our city teams are working with downtown businesses, property owners, and key stakeholders on the future of downtown. You all have seen this initiative. It is labeled Downtown Next. So it's taking the lessons learned from the pandemic, all of the things that we had to put in place very quickly to support our downtown businesses and businesses citywide, and seeing what can be implemented permanently in the future. So we took direction from council. We did some surveys and some direct business outreach, both with businesses and property owners. And we're coming up with some opportunities and scenarios for council to consider in early November. Moving on to blueprint and development services streamlining. So as you all remember, the Blueprint for Success version 2 was approved by council in 2019 to help guide the improvement of our development services processes. A number of initiatives have been completed in this plan, and some more ongoing initiatives that have been incorporated into our community development operations. And so we are concluding Blueprint for Success version 2. And we're actually going to be refocusing on permit streamlining and re-engineering. And what we're doing is really focusing on our customers, the folks who come to our permit counter and want to access services, and really focusing on them, what they need, and how do we make these processes easy to understand and predictable for them. So a lot of this work will be internal, but we will be coming back to council to show what we're completing. And around short-term rentals and cannabis. So in November 2019, council directed staff to provide a report on the regulations and management of collection of transit occupancy tax in the city and report back. Staff was tracking a piece of legislation, SB 555, which was by Senator McGuire, which would have allowed cities to delegate authority of collection of TOT to the state, and of course charging a fee to do that collection for us. That bill is not moving forward in this legislative cycle, but will likely come back in January, so we're going to keep that on our radar. So we were set to come back with a report on the legislation and practices of other jurisdictions, different management considerations to council. However, we're recommending to push this work out to later into 2022, given workload considerations and the like. Around cannabis regulations, council directed staff, to evaluate whether or not non-medical adult use commercial businesses and store retail should be allowed in Walnut Creek. So staff is doing some analysis on what other cities are doing and what options are available to the city of Walnut Creek, and we'll be back to council in October. Okay, questions on that priority?
All right, looks like Councilmember Silva.
Thank you very much, Carla, and I would like to cycle back to the first part, economic development, and the question may actually be for the Assistant City Manager, who is getting up to run from me or potentially answer a question. I am you hear a lot since the pandemic that retail is no longer the same, and the future, which might have been taking 10 years to have a change, is now, it took 10 days. What are the thoughts about the definition of retail? Are we open-minded as to what it might be in the future?
Yes, and that's actually part of the analysis that our consultant is going to be looking at is, which of these trends really have stuck. We know some things changed because we were in pandemic times, but we're asking him to look at which of these are really going to be permanent changes, at what magnitude. We're seeing some creative reuse of space from our larger retailers where perhaps they're not carrying as much on-floor inventory, but it doesn't mean they're not carrying inventory. And moving towards a more like buy online, pick up in store is the new BOPIS or something, I think is how you say it. So we're asking them to look at that as part of their analysis. And what's coming next? I mean, what are you seeing in other communities that maybe we haven't really seen hit here, so that we are looking very future focused and not just in what we were doing in 2019 before the pandemic hit. We're not assuming we're going back to 2019.
And that the result of that might mean some changes in some of our planning documents and our perspectives about how big a swath of pedestrian retail there might be or something like that.
Absolutely. So phase one is focused, as Carla mentioned, on downtown and our current vacancies. What can we do to get those spaces filled? We were just doing the kickoff meeting with the consultant earlier or late last week. And, we were happy to see that some of the larger spaces we were really worried about are seeing activity. And so there is movement afoot, which is exciting. So looking first downtown, what do we have to do to fill the current vacancies? And then the second phase is going to be looking at our overall retail inventory, what's aging out, what can be revitalized, what maybe is archaic and should be repurposed potentially for another land use. And then also looking at our strategic plans and our specific plans, more importantly, to say, where have we planned for more ground floor retail or other types of retail uses that perhaps, given the changes in the industry, we may want to scale back on? So that's kind of the final piece de resistance that we're looking for from him.
Thank you.
Any other questions from council? Mayor Pro Tem?
Not sure if it's for Terry, it probably is. Kind of following up on the retail strategy, sort of some of the planning and zoning changes you were talking about seem like they're more long-term in nature, that we'd get the report and have time. But do you envision, and I sort of do, that there would be short-term zoning changes that the consultant might recommend? Have you given any thought to how we might be able to quickly get that into the process before the Planning Commission and the City Council to implement some of those short-term fixes?
Yes, I think it depends on where the short-term issue is embedded. So if it's in, some heftier CEQA documents, we might have a longer path. But for those things that we could simply quickly move through the process, that would be part of what we'd be working on with community development, is to figure out how to get those changes made swiftly. So for example, one thing that has already been mentioned is, hey, what if you started allowing the back of buildings in downtown to be used for in-store pickups, right? So drive-up pickups, you could activate the back half of the building. Right now, the current zoning might frown upon that, but it seems like it might be a simple fix. So for those things, we're not going to wait till the entire study is done. If there's some great ideas that come out of it as we go, we're going to start looking at those so that we can start iteratively rolling these out.
That's encouraging. I think the pickup window, I recall with the Shake Shack, was another one that our zoning code hadn't quite envisioned.
Yes, absolutely. Right now, we're taking it full use of the superpower council gave us to waive those in the rebound phase. But we do know that that's something people have been asking for, so we'll start that discussion sooner rather than later.
Okay, thank you.
I think. Councilmember Darling.
This is just a quick question on the permit streamlining business process reengineering. I'm happy to see it being very customer focused, and I was wondering, are you going to have an opportunity for people that have gone through the process to give you their input on it as you go forward?
Yes, I'll ask Mark Wardlaw, our CDD director, to come comment on that, but my understanding is that's what we mean by customer-centered, is that we are taking that feedback and factoring it into our thinking. I'll let Mark comment further.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. The customer-centered program is key to this business process reengineering. We have a number of different customers that come to us. Some are large-scale developers, some are mom-and-pop businesses, some are single-family homeowner properties that are seeking an ADU. And so it's very important for us to actually interview them and understand, and for our staff to understand their experience. The more sophisticated the applicant, the more practice and history they have in the process, the more familiar. And others have a very, very low level of information and practice with this. And so understanding their needs first is actually the first part of this. And we're working with a particular consultant who will facilitate these interviews. And then throughout the process, we want to maintain a really strong sense of input and feedback and an actual listening, so our staff understands what will be most helpful to our applicants and how we can best serve them.
Okay, so I'm hearing you're going to stratify it and make sure that you hit each one of those categories as you interview the customer base, make sure that the ADU people and the Broadway Plaza remodel people are all represented?
Yes, and in different sections. There are three main phases to a development process. The entitlement, as you're getting your use permit, your Shake Shack drive-up window, your grading and final mapping, and then the actual building permit aspect. And the applicants have different experiences, different skill sets as they go through that. So it's not only scale and familiarity, but it's also where are they in the process. And so we really need to understand and document that experience. And again, some are, and as we do that, we'll learn very positive experiences very negative experiences, what we can learn from, and what other communities and jurisdictions have even better practices than we do.
Thank you.
I think that wraps up the questions for this segment.
Okay, next section, environmental sustainability and climate action. So the goal of this priority is really to complete the update to the city's sustainability and climate action plan. We are currently in phase 2. Phase 1, which was more technical analyses and community outreach, we've completed. In phase 2, we are looking at 3 different scenarios of greenhouse gas emission reductions, and also examining what is the return on investment on those in reducing those. So we are at a place where we need to do further analysis on these scenarios before we bring them back for council consideration. We're also conducting additional outreach to some governmental organizations to see how we can leverage their particular programs and their initiatives that are also going on to better improve our climate action plan. So we're scheduled to come back to you by the end of this calendar year, both with those scenarios that are vetted and really looking at ROI, and also coming back to council with a climate emergency resolution. And thereafter, phase 3, we're looking at a draft plan, environmental study, and plan adoption in later 2022. Questions on this?
Questions? Mayor Pro Tem?
So, on the plan, then, I don't see Kara here, but is it true that it'll obviously be targeted towards the 2030 state target for greenhouse gas emission reductions? Are we also factoring in the 2045 executive order for carbon neutrality, or putting ourselves on a projection to meet that standard?
I'll let our community development director answer that one.
Hello again. Yes, when we came to the council in phase 1, we had 3 levels of goal alternatives to shape the recommendations to. One was the existing climate action plan measures. The next was satisfying through a qualified plan, the current legislative structure, which is the 2030 date plus the 2050 goal that was established. And then the third structure was the 2045 executive order, which is a goal at this point, to be carbon neutral by 2045. And so the part that we're working on to detail now is to get a better sense of what the cost benefit and cost implications are of those measures. And partly that includes doing work that hasn't been very well developed to this point. CARB, the Air Resources Board, they're working on the scoping plan for 2045 now. So we're spending more time to focus on what do the estimated conceptual costs look like to achieve carbon neutrality.
That's helpful. So it's taking longer to develop the overall plan, but we're trying to be future focused and consider the cost benefit analysis in doing that.
Correct. And our purpose is that when we do come back for the council to provide direction on setting the plan direction, that you have the best information you can have about the costs, the feasibility, and technology choices. We would expect our recommendations to include that, it's a living document, probably on a 2-year or so update of just emission evaluations, and then a 5-year or so progressive continual update to reflect the changes that we see, the progressive changes in technology. So we're talking about EV uptake increase now, and there's certainly conversation of future hydrogen cars. The automated vehicles are trending for projections. So all of those trends suggest that you want to be nimble and current in your planning and review, and not only in technology, but what market is doing, what people are actually buying. So, yes.
That's great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a quick question, Mark, actually, before you step on down. I think I know the answer to this, but I just want to make sure. Obviously, the whole state, every city is in various stages of this. Some are probably lagging behind and some are much more aggressive. And I think we've always been at the forefront of looking to be as proactive as possible. Are we able to borrow generously, let's say, from some of the plans that other cities have implemented and being able to look at that, and rather than having to recreate the wheel for each and every different item that we're looking at within this?
Absolutely. One of the most important things we do is to have a thorough best practices review. Every community that is progressive has some different nuance in their programs, whether they've developed and implemented an electric vehicle roadmap, whether they're increasing photovoltaics, and whether they're identifying the implementation of building electrification through a phased approach, like focusing first on the replacement of gas water heaters with electric water heaters. So there are a lot of strategies out there. The most difficult part is finding actual base data about costs that you can then correlate to what you're doing. There is not a robust level of information about cost and cost benefit, and our team is now very focused on that, so that when we do come forward, you'll have a sense of scale and expense.
Great, thank you, appreciate that. Any other questions from council? No, I think we're good with that section then. Carla, if you want to bring the next one forward?
I feel like the MC at the party. All right, next priority is infrastructure and facilities. And really, this is focused on the Your Parks, Your Future initiative. And you may remember this initiative began in 2018 and was designed as really a two-phase project. The first phase focused on recommendations of future arts and programming and facility needs of Heather Farm Community Center, Clark Swim Center, Civic Park Community Center, and Shadelands Art Center. And then phase two was really focused on master planning of Heather Farm Park and Civic Park. So we're kind of in this middle phase on phase one implementation, which is really focused on the direction that council gave us, which was to prioritize the combining of Heather Farm Park Community Center and Clark Swim Center, and considering both recreational size pools, both a 25-meter and a 50-meter pool. So we were in front of you in July, where we confirmed the project site, which was in study area, which is Heather Farm Park. And this area will include the existing Clark Swim Center and Community Center, the adjacent parking lot, picnic areas, artificial pond, and excluding the All Abilities Playground. So that was confirmed in July. We were back in front of you in August to present a variety of funding mechanisms that council could choose from to fund the reconstruction and rebuild of these facilities. Council directed us to focus the funding plan around a general obligation bond or sales tax, and directed us to engage a polling consultant to gauge community priorities and viability of a potential ballot measure next year. So we are in the process of gathering data for our financial analysis. We've also put out an RFP for a polling consultant, and we should have information back on both financial consultant actually this week, and then having selected a polling consultant by October 1st. And we'll be giving you more of a robust update on all of this section of this program in October. And then later in November, we'll be coming back to you with a Walnut Creek Aquatics Foundation funding plan and potential MOU for money that could be raised towards a 50-meter pool. We'll also be presenting options on a future location of a combined swim center and community center, those options. So that's all in November. So this priority is moving pretty quickly through this fall. With that, happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Carla. Something tells me we'll be talking a lot in November and October and everywhere in between. Councilmember Silva.
Thank you very much. Question for clarification. When we met in August and we were talking about funding mechanisms, my recollection is we also said that we weren't going to simply look at when we said we needed to understand what the community felt were their priorities, it was not just, is it something in infrastructure or not? It also was a wider ranging scope of potential services as well as facilities. Is my recollection correct?
You're correct.
So that is all part of what you're talking, the group is talking to the consultants on in terms of surveying the community.
Yes.
Yes, that's correct. And, excuse me, and as part of the work that will be done between now and we come back to your council in October, we'll likely be engaging in discussions with each of you for input on some of those topics. And then obviously we would have council meetings in October and November if needed to discuss those further. So this is the beginning of many conversations on this priority, as Carla noted.
Thanks, Carla. Looks like we're saving up our questions for October.
All right, next priority is social wellness and public safety. And this priority is really three different areas of work. So mental health crisis response and training, continuing to address homelessness, and enhancing community engagement. So we'll walk through each of these. So on the non-PD response calls to service and calls for services, the City of Walnut Creek initiated the effort to pilot a more comprehensive 24/7 social service crisis response with the county's behavioral health division. We've also budgeted dollars to support this effort as well, both in fiscal year 2021 and 22 and 23. So a working group has developed a plan to identify and document current processes and programs in place responding to crisis calls, identified models used by other cities and counties, and evaluated some options. And our city manager is representing our city in this effort, and it is highly engaged. When we last updated you on this program, the county's program, this effort was in the design phase and has made significant progress. So the crisis response program has been given a name, A3, which has a symbolic nature to it. It's intended to indicate that anyone in Contra Costa County can access timely and appropriate behavioral health crisis services anywhere, anytime, hence A3. So the primary focus of A3 has been the Crisis Call Center, which is named the Miles Hall Community Crisis Hub. The intent of this call hub is to route calls from 911, 211, suicide hotlines, and other crisis centers to this call hub. And at the call hub, a call will be triaged in order to determine the best method of response. So the Miles Hall Crisis Community Hub is in its early stages and is being piloted by routing some calls from throughout the county. This new process is being tested and refinements are being made. The goal is to have all behavioral health calls routed through this call center. And the county is also in the middle of identifying and planning for expansion of the call hub, which is could include acquisition of a facility, staffing, and technology needs. Also, plans are being reviewed for how to scale up this program. Considerable efforts are being made to look at funding for this type of program, because it is a considerable effort to have these to have this call center staffed. And so the county is looking at, in conjunction with other cities, a number of different funding opportunities, both federal and state dollars, as well as Measure X, which is a county sales tax measure. So the county health team that's putting on this program also made its case for funding this program with Measure X dollars to the Measure X Advisory Committee in June. A number of other cities throughout the county and other organizations also supported that. So the Measure X Committee received lots of requests for funding and is still developing its recommendations, and will be coming out with a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors, who will then make a decision later in the coming months. So the next area of this is our police department training. So the police department completed 2 new consultant-led trainings. This is in addition to the 13 existing trainings that they already do around mental health crisis response. So the one was a crisis intervention training provided by a licensed therapist, and the other was a non-criminal barricaded subject training. These trainings have been completed. The next training that's scheduled is in November, and it's a simulator training that's focused on mental health related calls. This training creates an immersive, realistic, and stress-inducing environment. And it provides officers an opportunity to practice de-escalation techniques in a rapidly evolving situation. And what's unique about this training really is that it allows officers to receive immediate feedback on how they're responding to these types of calls and situations. And then the third part of this section is around the Regional PD Crisis Intervention Team. So the police department partnered with Martinez and Pleasant Hill Police Departments to establish this team to improve each agency's ability to respond to mental health crises. A MOU was signed in May. We are providing 4 officers, including 2 of our HOP officers, Homeless Outreach Program officers, to this effort. And really, we're in this phase of figuring out which additional training needs are needed for this program. Next section of this priority is continuing to address homelessness. The City Council did approve funding for a full-time core team in the fiscal 22 and 23 budget, and this core team is now meeting monthly. As I mentioned previously, the Homeless Outreach Program, or HOP team, was reinstated in July. And the city did form an internal homeless response team, which is really a cross-departmental team of all employees who may interact with homeless and how to provide services in a safe and equitable and inclusive way. And so this team has met a number of times and is identifying community and organizational issues that may be present, and also establishing a program for training for all city staff that will be coming later in 2022. An enhanced police department and community engagement. So in early August, the police department did contract with Nordstrom to provide additional law enforcement on an overtime basis for more presence downtown in areas that could be targeted for snatch and grabs. As the mayor mentioned earlier, there are more patrols, foot patrols downtown, so there is more of a police presence to create the feeling of safety, but to keep eyes on the street as well. And then also the department continues to partner with Walnut Creek Downtown and bar and restaurant owners and managers to address public safety concerns. Also in July, a member of the police department was assigned directly to our social media team, which is, if you've seen the PD social media, it is it shows the day-to-day operations of the police department and tells some good stories and gives the community information about what it is really like to police Walnut Creek, and also tell some good stories about the achievements of the department. And then lastly, the department did form a continuous improvement team to really bring forward ideas of how to improve the department operationally and better engage the community. And so this group is represented by all different levels of the department, as well as different classifications in the department as well. So it's a good representation of employees in our department thinking about how to improve police operations in our city. Questions on the Social Wellness and Public Safety Committee? Wow. Priority.
Councilmember Silva?
Thank you, Carla. There's a lot in this category. I'd like to go back to the mental health crisis response. And I don't know, perhaps the city manager will end up having to answer this question. Is there any estimate at the county level as to what the one-time cost will be to basically stand up a county-wide program? And then also what the annual recurring cost might be? Or are we too scared to ask?
Yeah, some of us have been asking that question for a while now, the county team. They do not have full answers yet, and they're looking at phases for this of how to staff it up and increase it over time as opposed to in one fell swoop. So what they're and the reason for that is they're trying to, they've not stated this directly, it's my interpretation, but I think they're worried about putting a really large number out there and scaring some of the entities about how much it costs and how much they may need to charge various cities. So what they're doing, in addition to the Measure X funds, which they put out there a request for $5 million of one time and up to $20 million of ongoing, just to give you a sense of scale. And
20% of the total?
it depends on, so what they're also looking at is, can they redirect some of the existing resources? So as we know, we have core teams in many parts of the county. We have the MET teams. How might they be part of this response in order to keep some of the costs down? So in addition to the Measure X funds that I mentioned, they are also looking at federal stimulus funding, ongoing Medi-Cal reimbursement, as well as Mental Health Services Act to redirect some of that to keep the cost down to any individual entities. So we're really interested to see what comes about. To give you a sense, let me back up, of scale. When they were looking at full scale, we were looking at, I believe it was 32-person teams, so 60-member teams. And right now, I believe they have about 3 or 4 teams. So that gives you a sense of what we're looking at. And then with that, of course, you have vehicles, equipment to go along with, and then obviously the call center in and of itself has numerous staff. And I'm not suggesting all of these would necessarily be county staff. There may be some contracting involved. So it is very large scale. They are looking at how to incrementally scale it up over time so that we can obtain sustainable funding to keep it moving forward.
Thank you. Thank you.
Councilmember Haskew.
I have 2 questions. The first one is every officer going to get this mental health training, or is it just a few of the officers?
Invite our police chief up here to answer that question.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor and City Council. So our goal is to actually train all of our employees who would have contact with the public, but mainly focused on field staff. Certainly patrol officers first who are working in the field, and then other police department staff who have other field duties, maybe parking enforcement, things like that.
Good, because I bet they get a lot of difficult people, and how to handle difficult situations can only be helpful. The second question I have is, how are we measuring our homeless situation? Because I've heard from some people that they don't see any homeless, and I've heard from other people that we have very unpleasant experiences with homeless out in there. So where are we now?
Yeah.
I appreciate that this is looking toward the future, but can I have a little bit of where we are now?
Sure. Yeah, we just talked about this with Community Development Director, Mr. Wardlaw, and I. The last count that I know of that was conducted was in 2019, I believe. And around that time, we had about 80 homeless people who were counted in Walnut Creek. I think estimates are probably that it's higher than that, but we just haven't done an actual in-person count. But we just had a meeting a couple of days ago where we actually talked about how we're going to capture data, what types of data we're going to capture, and how we're going to measure our success when it comes to homelessness. So we're kind of sorting that out now, but I think the next step would be to do some sort of count, and that if the county doesn't get around to it soon, we might have to do it in-house just with available department staff.
I was at the county meeting where they decided because of COVID, life was going to be very difficult for the count. So
That's
I
correct.
appreciate that we're thinking of other things.
Actually, Chief Knox, as long as you're up there, I have a question about school resource officers.
Okay.
And what's the plan on them coming back into our schools? Because obviously school's back in session.
Right. Yeah, we're just starting to have that conversation. We did have 2 school resource officers at the schools, but when the pandemic hit and nobody was going to school, we put them back to patrol where they were really needed because of staffing concerns. I don't think we're quite there yet. We're trying to fill some voids, but we're having that conversation now, so you can expect to see some resolve soon.
Great. Would you mind giving us an update when that occurs, just so that we know and can also answer questions from the community?
Certainly.
Thank you. And then the last question I have actually is probably more for Carla right now, but thank you, Chief Knox. And Carla, I understand, and I know the community will be interested in hearing this, there is an update to AB 988. And what happened with that, and obviously there was quite an investment, and we wrote a letter in support of it. And of course, that's our own Assembly Member Rebecca Bauer-Cahan that has sponsored it.
Yeah, so the AB 988 did not move forward in this legislative cycle. However, there is $20 million of funding to implement the 988 number, which is actually a federal mandate to go into place in June 2022. So there is funding to do this. Assemblymember Bauer-Cahan is still working on this legislation. I think the biggest issue with the legislation was the funding mechanism around it, because it was a fee to our telecom industry folks. So that's where that rub happened. And not saying that that's why the legislation didn't move forward, but there is a $20 million federal grant coming through to implement that in California, 988 in California.
Thank you.
A follow-up question on that. I thought it might be a little confusing on AB 988 as to what is really meant by the federal mandate to implement. And so perhaps at some point we can get clarification if that's call centers or if that's actually the technology to basically make that number work ubiquitously across the nation, which is a technical issue inside the telecoms companies. So I'd like some clarification on that in the future.
Thank you. Yeah, we had the same question, so we'll definitely get back to you all about that.
I don't see any more questions. Carla, is that, well, now we would have to be going to public comment if we are done with this.
Sure. So next steps, your next quarterly update will be winter 2022. Winter is likely January for all of you. And really, the recommended action for you this evening is really to receive the report.
Great. Thank you very much. So with that, let's open this up if anybody from the public has any comments on this portion. And if any member of the public would like to provide public comments, please use the raised hand feature or press *9 if you're connected by audio if you'd like to provide a public comment. For those who desire to provide public comment on this consideration item, please raise your hand now. And as a reminder, each speaker will have 2 minutes to make their oral remarks. The Zoom feed for each speaker will cut off automatically at 2 minutes. Written comments submitted have been and will, during this item, be posted to the city's website for public review and are included in the meeting record but will not be separately read into the record. Also, please note that during public hearings and consideration items, group spokespersons are allotted 10 minutes in lieu of other members of the group speaking on the item. We trust that everyone will follow the rules. And at this time, I'll ask the city clerk if there are any members of the public who would like to provide comments.
Mayor, we have at least one speaker with their hand raised. We'll go ahead and bring in Barbara.
Barbara spoke very briefly earlier, just waiting for this item.
Hello, I'm Barbara Guinness. I've lived in Walnut Creek since 1996. I wanted to talk about the one of the items that we were just going over. The 5 strategic priorities for the city for the next 2 calendar years. And one of the ones that was covered was environmental sustainability and climate action. I see in your speaker did talk about you want to remain a leader in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. You want to update your action plan. You want to establish a funding program. And you want to implement the action plan as well as other efforts in program areas such as alternative transportation, open space protection, and disaster resiliency. And if you know me, I want to talk about open space protection. Anyway, and my comments are the proposed mountain bike flow trail for Southern Lime Ridge does not seem to fit into your priority number 3, which includes the item open space protection. The mountain bike flow trail will carve through erodible soils, be visible for miles, disrupt the wildlife corridor to Mount Diablo since it's right there, displace, destroy native plants, including rare ones like the Mount Diablo fairy lantern, disrupt federal and state threatened wildlife like the Alameda whip snake, which is there, endanger rare wildlife like the Mount Diablo horned lizard, which is also there. It's going to traverse over a natural spring where in wet years, hopefully we'll have some, a lot of water comes through there and there's frogs and other items, other species. Wants to wind along a ridge line that still presents significant erosion, ruts, and channels from past wet years. I think your rangers probably know about that. You'll be creating a constant fire danger issue during these, it seems like every year now, elongated dry seasons, which is caused by climate changes we're all talking about. And you'll endanger the health.
Thank you, Barbara. Do you have any other speakers?
Mayor, there's no additional speakers.
Okay, seeing that there's no speakers, we will bring this back to council. And I don't know if any council members have any further comments they would like to make on this, on receiving the report of our priority updates. Councilmember Silva?
I'd like to thank staff for the update and for adhering to what we've asked for, which is to receive updates quarterly. I think we, all five of us, know that it has been a difficult 2 years, that staffing has been redirected to many activities that weren't originally on our work plan, and also that staffing levels are shorter now than we had hoped they would be due to labor shortages and impacts in the labor market. So just a very large thank you. And for myself personally, I understand if a few things are delayed, but thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Yeah, just to add on that, I also appreciate the quarterly updates. It feels like it's helpful to see the progress that's being made in real time. And I also want to commend staff for some of the more innovative things that are happening, I think, in terms of the internal groups on homelessness, in addition to diversity, equity, inclusion. I think that's really encouraging to hear about, as well as the efforts the police department is making with the social media. So thank you.
Councilmember Haskell? Councilmember Darling?
Yeah, I too wanted to say thanks for all the work putting this together. I know you guys have a lot going on, and I recognize that as you go forward, there's going to be some key vacancies. And so feel free to come back to us and give us realistic ideas on what you're able to accomplish. And if you're, let us know if you're struggling in a particular area. I know I worry about the climate change sustainability action plan. So let's keep an eye on it and let us know if you need us to help refine our priorities even more to help you guys use your staff effectively.
Councilmember Haskell?
Thank you, and thank you, staff. What I have gleaned from reading these priorities is that you have given the city hope, and that hope comes from the fact that there are components in our city that value sustainability. There's a component that values the ability to get their permits and things done fast, and that there are lots of things that can improve that system. Consistently throughout this evening, I have heard that you have heard there are these wants and needs from the community, and you are addressing them. And you aren't just saying we're addressing them, you're really addressing them. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you, and I really am hopeful that we are going to be on top of these things, and yet again, a leader in our community about responsiveness to our citizens.
Thank you, and I'll echo that as well. I know there's a lot of work put into this, excuse me, by all the departments and city staff. And this kind of an update is really valuable, but also I think it's important for everybody to know that is watching this or watches what's happening within the city, that these are conversations that are constantly going, and each one of us council members are constantly having these discussions with department heads and our city manager, even though you might not hear about the updates at each and every meeting. For example, traffic and transportation didn't come up in a priority, or just the maintenance itself and the running of the city, or affordable housing. these are areas that we constantly also talk about. We haven't identified them as one of the 5 priorities, but that doesn't mean that we're not working on those along with all these priorities at the same time. So just because you don't hear an update, whether you're at home or coming to a council meeting, doesn't mean that these aren't constantly evolving. And so we appreciate the quarterly updates. It also gives us something to go on and ask further questions. And for me personally, when I'm speaking at different groups, and I think this probably goes for all of us to a certain extent, people are always asking us about updates on individual parts of these. And so this really helps us also be within the community and have these discussions and what's happening. And people love to hear that what's happening, that they think that they are now in the know to tell their own neighbors and friends. And that, of course, helps all of our objectives. So again, thank you very much, each and every one of you.
Thank you to each of you. If I could just add a comment or two. I know that I can speak on behalf of all staff safely on this. We do appreciate your sincere feedback, and I want to add my thanks to staff for pulling this together as well. And I did want to follow up on some of the comments that a few of you made about really having to prioritize our priorities and our other work that comes up unexpectedly. As I have shared with each of you individually, our vacancy rate is, at least in my 4-year tenure here, is an all-time high and about double what we typically run. We're at about 15%, and we are feeling that. And so we may be coming back to you with, some of the subsets of these priorities and the work plans of really how to focus on what's critical. Obviously, they're all very important, but what's most urgent and timely. And I would just add, if you look at, there's a lot of work here in these priorities, and a lot that's upcoming. So I do appreciate your feedback in that area, and we'll certainly take you up on your offer to further prioritize in the future so that we can deliver on what's most important.
Okay. Thank you, Dan. How are we at the council? Do we need a 5-minute break, or power through? We're going to power through. All right. So the next consideration item is authorizing the city's voting delegate and alternates to vote on the proposed Cal Cities bylaws amendments at the 2021 Cal Cities Annual Conference. And at this, there is Carla Hansen again, ready to provide the staff presentation.
Me again, second time. For the record, Carla Hansen, Deputy City Manager. No PowerPoint, just a quick staff report on this item. The League of California Cities, Cal Cities Board of Directors approved proposed bylaw changes that will go before the General Assembly later this week, which 4 out of 5 of you will be at that meeting. The City Council can delegate or direct their delegate and alternates on how to vote on these bylaws. And so the recommended action before you is to discuss and direct, if you so choose, your delegate and your alternates on how to vote on these bylaws amendments. And just for background, the amendments to the bylaws are to adjust the composition of the board to achieve a higher impact and more representative board by adding a director to the board from each of the 5 diversity caucuses, and transitioning members of the National League of Cities board from Cal Cities directors to 1 non-voting advisor to the Cal Cities board. Also recognizing the Cal Cities diversity caucuses in the Cal Cities bylaws, updating the League of California Cities moniker to Cal Cities, which recently changed, and then some other various technical revisions. So those are the proposed bylaws. No staff recommendation here, really. There's some options for you to consider. You could direct your delegate to vote in support of these bylaws, remain neutral, or vote in opposition. With that, I'll give it back to council to discuss.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to first hand it over to Councilmember Silva, who is going to be the president of Cal Cities, to start the questioning or the commenting.
So this is an opportunity for the organization as a whole across the state to really embrace what the diversity of the state really brings to the table. Up to this point in time, and it's been about 30 years since the first diversity caucus was established. In fact, the Latino caucus is celebrating its 30th anniversary this year. The most recently formed caucus is the Women's Caucus, which represents half the state, right? I think what's important here is that up to this point in time, the caucuses have been recognized as being a part of Cal Cities, but they haven't had seats at the table. Conversely, they have not, their structure has been not dictated by the Cal Cities organization. It has been up to those separate organizations to have a function and bylaws separate and above that. So this will bring the diversity caucuses to the table with a vote for each caucus, as well as integrate them more fully into the organization so that their structure can be more appropriately similar to the way we manage the divisions and the departments that we operate. And I'm happy to answer questions further. I will be running the meeting on Friday, so Kevin, do not fall over. Luella, do not fall over, because I cannot stand up there and vote as I'm running a meeting. That's going to look a little odd. So,
Although if I vote the wrong way, I'll get a stern reprimand.
well, Tom can tell you about that. So happy to answer questions.
I don't have any questions. Any questions further? No? Well, this is a consideration item, so yes, Councilmember Haskins.
I've talked to Cindy a little bit about this. We are, part of what the League Cal Cities is trying to do, I'm trying to transition to their new name. Part of is to get more inclusive. My concern is that there are circumstances where cities will have more than one representative in areas. Controlling the geographic balance of this is going to be a little more difficult. Did the board, when they proposed these, or whoever proposes them, did they consider that when they made the choices?
So the proposed amendments to the bylaws were the first step of a multi-year effort. At the beginning of the year, we formed a governance advisory committee to look at all of the governance issues across the organization. There were 49 recommendations, and these are just 2 of the 49. Many of them including the potential for term limits for members of the board of directors, composition of the nominating committee, and others will be, one of my first tasks as president will be to form a new committee that will take many of those issues forward and look at them more carefully. And then many are organizational in nature, including how we apply for positions and seats either on the board or on committees where we can improve transparency and member engagement. So it's a multi-year effort that we will be going through. I think it's very exciting, and but this is just the first step.
Great.
And yes, you're right, because, so let me, one of the interesting factors about the League of California Cities is that we have loosely 50 members of the board, and only 12 of those members are actually selected by the organization at large at the state level. The rest are selected at the division level, which there are 16 divisions across the state, at the department level, et cetera. So you have, it's an organization that has very little control over its membership, and you will and have in the past had members on the board from the same city because of the virtue of where they fit into the system.
Would you ask? Would you like a motion that we?
Well, first we need to go to the public still.
Okay, good point.
So let's go to public communications on this. And again, if there's any member of the public that would like to provide public comments at this time, please raise your hand. You'll have 2 minutes to speak. I'll be brief, and because I've said this 3 times already tonight. You'll get 2 minutes. And if you would like to comment, now is the time to raise your hand. City Clerk, do we?
We have no hands raised for public comment.
No hands raised. Okay, now we can bring it back, and if you'd like to make a motion, Councilmember Haskew.
I'd like to make a recommendation that our representatives are authorized to vote to support the recommended bylaw changes.
I would second that.
We have a motion and a second. Susie, could you read the roll, please?
Councilmember Haskew.
Aye.
Councilmember Darling.
Aye.
Councilmember Silva.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Francois.
Aye.
And Mayor Wilk.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
All right, thank you. So this concludes our meeting. We will, 4 of us, again, are going up to the Cal Cities Conference tomorrow morning, and we'll report back to that at our next regularly scheduled City Council meeting, which is on October 5th, and we'll see you here then. Good night.